Howdy everybody. Working day on a Jeep MP231J transfer case. Now, went into this thing because we got a lot of noise that was going on and whatnot. So, I discovered something that was kind of neat, especially with the SYE kit that's installed, that caught my attention, and hence why I thought I'd put this video together. Alright, first off, what I'm going into here was, well, as it turns out, in part of the disassembly here, planetary gear. Planetary gear assembly here should have some thrust washers on each side of it, and yet it does not. Those had all gotten trashed, so get the new planetary assemblies up in order. Upon inspection of the gear was alright, except for that the bearing inside now feels a little bit on the nasty side. Well, coming up into here, as most of y'all know, that how this assembly works is that your shift collar here is sliding between your four high or your high and low ranges. Okay? With the 231J, of course, going into 4 low, this is engaged along with the respective collar, and inspecting on it, everything turned out pretty well decent. Well, I got to look at the shift collar here in the mechanism. Everything also appears pretty straightforward, and no real burrs or chips or anything. Of course, it was a little on the dirty side, but started getting down here to the main assembly. Now, I did discover an issue that came about with this particular SYE kit, and to go along in the nature of the way that the Jeep transmission or transfer case is functioning here. On a normal operation, even when in two-wheel drive, the chain assembly here is, of course, spinning its respective sprocket on the main shaft here, alright, and generally speaking, while you're traveling down the road, both are spinning at the same speed. But in a case of where I had drive shaft problems on the front end, I had the drive shaft mainly disconnected so that I wouldn't get driveline vibe at highway speeds. This entire assembly from the chain in this particular sprocket here would remain stationary as this was spinning. This is where I discovered that a problem was coming about. Alright, the initial collar. Get the chain off of here. Now, in earlier versions of the 231, they used to use needle bearing assembly inside of here. Well, later versions they did not. Now the reason for that was in the earlier versions of the transfer case, there was a vacuum disconnect inside of the front axle, in which disconnects the axle shafts, better fuel economy, so therefore the front drive shaft really wasn't spinning all of that much. But in later versions of the TJ, the vacuum disconnect was obsoleted, so they made a change here in this assembly to a non-bearing. Well, that's okay if your front chain is hooked up and the front drive shaft is spinning, even though you don't have the shift collar locking it in to gear. Even in just too high, that assembly is still going to be rotating roughly the same rate as the front rear ends. Anyway, where I'm going with this is that when this is made stationary, we now have issues being developed. You see, this is a non-bearing assembly, and in the bearing surface where it rides at here, this only receives oil through these grooves on the side. That is a potential problem, because if you hold that stationary while this is spinning inside, especially at high speed, you start to wind up with getting discoloration, where it's been metal on metal rubbing, pushing the oil out of this and causing grooving down deep inside of the bore there. On this particular gear set, I can see that we've got some discoloration going on. It's been blued. Well, I don't think it's severe enough to end up having to replace my shaft assembly, but I am going with a wide chain conversion kit in which one of these gears is going to be getting replaced. So in thinking about that, I've got a new drive shaft coming in. I got to looking and I'm like, well, what can we do to prevent future problems if I've got to run that front drive shaft disconnected for whatever reason? I don't want to be trashing my new gear set. We start studying oil flow from your oil pump, which is typically mounted right here. If I can get the splines to line up for me. Anyway, slides all the way down, seal over this area, oil into the bottom of the pump through its pickup tube, exiting right there in the sides. It's pressurizing this bore assembly. Pressure enters in here, exits here in the area of the sliding collar. Keep that well lubricated. Also, through the end of the shaft to lubricate our caged bearing down here, and then out this side of the shaft here, in which that oil is then transferred into this area, lubricating out through these holes in order to go on out to our planetary gear set and lubricate those. But upon initial inspection, when I started looking, there was no primary oil feed for this slider. All it ever got was oil dripped down on it from a chain that would be normally spinning. Well, in normal circumstances, this is okay. It would do just fine, except if you have to run a stationary front drive shaft, be it the slip joints wallered out, you popped a bearing cap, for any reason whatsoever. Well, now you're going to have, this is going to scrub its oil off as it's spinning, and now you've got a problem. My solution to this, and I'm not sure if it was this way on the early TJ shafts or not, was to drill a hole through in the non-bearing surface area into the center of the shaft here, into its main oil feed. The idea being is that as the oil pressure is entering, it's pressurizing our slider, giving us some oil there, lubricating the end here, but then I'm also going to be sending a dedicated oil pressure feed into this chain sprocket assembly. So again, without having my stock shaft to reference or an earlier YJ style transfer case shaft, I feel this is going to be a necessary improvement for the just in case I ever trash another drive shaft. Anyway, that's my little bit on this. I just wanted to kind of point out a few things. Y'all have a good one. Happy wheeling.